Jennifer Crumbley found guilty of involuntary manslaughter for the 4 students that her son Ethan Crumbley executed at Oxford High School in 2021. This is a case that has had a lot of people talking, a lot of us wondering, well, what could the repercussions be from this if found guilty, or if found not guilty? We now know the answer. It is, in fact, guilty. We're going to take a listen to some of the testimony from the trial, from the very mouth of Jennifer Crumbley, and we're also going to be taking a listen and watch, if you will. If you're listening to us, we are also on YouTube where you can watch this. You will be able to see the testimony from her attorney as well, especially in closing arguments. And what I would call the word I'm going to go for here, Stacey, is clumsy. I don't know really any other way to discuss what her attorney was like. I mean, I guess raw. How would you describe what you witnessed there in the courtroom the other day?
What I felt was desperation.
Yeah.
And from desperation comes clumsiness. I felt that I think she was reaching. I think she knew that her client should have been convicted, if that makes sense, and was just reaching for things. I heard her talking about, was it that some kids have snowmobiles or access to like recreational vehicles, and I'm sitting there thinking that's a little bit different than a gun. Yes, you can kill somebody with a recreational vehicle, but that's not its intended use. So it's really hard to say that, kids have access to things that can be harmful. A gun, its main intent is to do harm.
It is. I've heard that argument made. Bob Motta was on and is on this week, and we talk about that because there's some tweets that flew his way about that. And we're going to dive into some of those areas of discussion. But to begin, let's just take a look at what it was like as the verdict came down here on the 6th of February, 2024. This is audio from the courtroom. And if you're watching us on YouTube, on the Hidden Killers podcast channel, you can see it. This is the
Ladies and gentlemen, I've been informed that verdict. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Are you the correct person?
I am.
Could you please read your verdict?
Individually?
Sure.
Okay. On count 1 of involuntary manslaughter as to Madison Baldwin, we find the defendant guilty of involuntary manslaughter. On count 2 of involuntary manslaughter in regards to Tate Muir, we find the defendant guilty of involuntary manslaughter. On count 3, as to involuntary manslaughter regarding Hannah St. Juliana, we find the defendant guilty of involuntary manslaughter. And in count 4 of involuntary manslaughter against Justin Schilling, we find the defendant guilty of involuntary manslaughter.
Thank you, Paul. You can be seated.
a very defeated looking Jennifer Crumbley, not a lot of emotion, just a sigh. I would imagine when you get that sort of information, especially in her shoes, probably one of the worst things has been waiting now for years, wondering, what is this verdict going to be? How is this going to affect my life? How is my life going to go forward? Is my life going to go forward? So I would imagine there's got to be, I mean, obviously a lot of disappointment, but probably some sort of sense of relief to know the answer to that question.
She had to know the answer before it was sent down, though. I feel like as this case was being presented, she had to have known it was not going her way. I realized that Ethan, her son, had taken the Fifth Amendment right to silence. But I think this would have been a supreme opportunity for him to come on the stand and basically confront a parent. As somebody that I grew up in an extremely abusive home. Well, I wouldn't say I grew up in it. My mom and I got away from it. But there's something almost peaceful that comes from confronting a parent when they won't do the right thing. And this could have been a moment for him. Yes, he was completely guilty of what he did, but it could have been a way for him to start his healing process, to confront her on the stand and say, I begged for help and you didn't give it to me. And so I feel like there were some missed opportunities here. Obviously, that's just my opinion, but both of them And dad, when's dad going to be held accountable? This entire
that's
family
coming up.
is just messed up.
I think we already know the answer to that, and I think dad now, I would imagine, is feeling, well, we know the verdict there, considering he is the one who actually provided the weapon. What is interesting, though, is the fact that they did try her first. They're going to go with the case that is more likely to garner a guilty verdict than the other. So they went with her first. I think they felt there was more accountability there on her part, even though the gun, in fact, was purchased with dad. And mom was not there when it actually took place. I think that was part of the argument that was trying to be made by Crumbley and her attorneys, was that I didn't know it was happening. They got it. But then it came out that there wasn't a whole lot of ways that they were keeping that gun away from the child, at least not reasonable ways, other than ways that maybe they told themselves would work. Obviously, it's not something that they succeeded in. Let's take a listen to some of her testimony. This is Jennifer Crumbley on the stand talking about the moment that she learned about what her son had done.
And on that date, when you went, it was the 26th, correct?
Yes, correct.
Do you know, when you left your house, did you know what James and Ethan, your son, were going to be doing that day?
No, they were sleeping when I left.
Okay. When you got home, were they home or were they where were they?
They weren't home.
Did they ever come home?
Yeah, I texted my husband and asked where you're at, and I believe he called me and told me that him and Ethan were at the Acme firearm store looking at guns.
Okay.
And then they came home from there.
Okay, did they purchase the gun that day?
They did.
Okay, the prosecution brought in exhibits showing the receipts, all that. You weren't with them when they bought the gun?
No, I was not.
Okay.
So that was an example right there of, I wasn't there, when this actually took place. Let's listen more to her talking about, feeling good being out with her son and the gun, which, had her son not been a school shooter, and obviously you can't predict the future. She didn't know that this was going to happen. I would imagine, quite honestly, there's thousands and thousands and thousands of parents in our country who would say that they go out shooting with their kids and they feel good. And up until this point, Jennifer Crumbley was certainly one of them, especially in the state of Michigan.
And did you end up posting something about it being a Mother's Sunday?
I did.
How did you feel about that day?
I felt it was a fun day. He asked me if I wanted to go to the shooting range with him, and he's never asked me, just me, to go before. My husband was doing DoorDash, and I felt good about it.
So we see obviously in the video you carry the gun in the case out. Did it have the cable lock on at that point?
No.
So what did you do from there?
This is when we're leaving. I put the gun in the back of my vehicle and drove.
Explain where in the back of the
So in the back of the SUV, it has a little thing that opens up to where the spare tire is.
And then where did you go?
I went home.
And did you take the gun in the house?
No, I took the bullets in the house and hid them, and my husband took the gun in the house when he got home from work.
So was there a period of time that the gun was not in the home but in your car?
Probably for a couple hours.
Why is that?
I just don't feel comfortable with it. I don't. That's his thing.
What's interesting about this is I feel like the the defense of Jennifer Crumbley worked more in prosecuting Jennifer Crumbley by asking some of these questions that point to her being irresponsible, I guess. Although at the same point, I don't know. I mean, what has happened here, and I think in a lot of this whole scenario, is really what goes on in the home of again, thousands of people who have guns. Again, Michigan is in Michigan. And I'm sorry, they have guns everywhere. Their kids they take them to school. They're in the back of their truck. They're not taking them in the building, but they're in the parking lot of the building. It's part of the culture. It really is. If you think I'm crazy, go live in Michigan for a year. I have.
Go live in Wisconsin for a year.
Live in
That's
Wisconsin.
where I am. That's where you're from.
Michigan is even worse. And I'm not saying Wisconsin's bad, but it's even more prevalent there in terms of that sort of a culture. So I really think, and I'm not trying to stick up for Jennifer Crumbley, but what they were doing was not out of the ordinary. at that point in time for having guns in their house and having a child that knows how to use a weapon. What is not ordinary or healthy or smart is to know that your son has mental health issues, or you're pretending he doesn't, or you're ignorant of it, and you're buying him a weapon. That's where the problem lies. It's not just they have a gun, they're going and shooting. Healthy, head on your shoulders, you got your shit together, it's a decent household, all that. That would be one different thing. But that is not what was going on here. We're also talking about a family, and again, I'm not trying to stick up for her, but I think we have to look at some of this in perspective as well. This sounds like a working family that has very little free time and does want to spend time with their child. And it sounds like she certainly did. And I don't know if she had mentally checked out at some point, or if she just didn't know what to do to try and connect with her child or get him back onto the right track. And again, this is where I go to my argument of what sort of resources even exist to help a parent in that sort of a situation. The answer, unless you got a lot of money, which these two did not,
Right.
zero. There's not much out there to help anyone in this situation. It's easy for us to go on the side and go, what an irresponsible, horrible thing to do. And in some ways, there were. They bought a gun for a kid that had mental health issues. That is unforgivable. They ignored the pleas for help on the math paper that literally said, help me, with a picture of a gun shooting a student. Those are the two unforgivable things, and why I think it's appropriate that, in fact, she was found guilty. Other than that, though, the rest of this story is not that, I guess, unusual, especially in that part of the country.
I imagine there are a lot of families in America where they're having some issues. They're having, I guess, a breakdown of the relationships in the family. They're stressed. You know, I throw out the pandemic a lot. That really created a lot of tension for families. They are in a position now where if somebody is struggling and has a crisis, you are 100% correct, Tony. They don't have the resources. The schools can't handle it. Maybe their insurance doesn't cover, more than 3 or 4 visits, and then your problem better be fixed. Yes,
if you even have insurance. I mean, they're doing DoorDash, to get by and such. And that's not necessarily a career path that most people necessarily want to be on. That's more so a job you're doing to make some extra money to get by.
Right.
And that it just sounds like they're doing what they can to get by. I'm not trying to make excuses for these people at all, but here we have now a precedent that has been set, and we're going to be going forward, and there will be more cases like this, and they could go back in time as well. We're just at the precipice of all of this, and if we want to legislate this, fine, go for it. But then you also need solutions to implement to the legislation that you're putting in place and these precedents that we're setting. So there better damn well now be all sorts of resources for parents with troubled children who are trying to work 4 or 5 jobs just to keep the lights on in their home, who at the end of that 3 full-time workday, I'm sorry, don't have the energy to sit down and visit with their kid and spend the ample time that they probably want to spend with their kid, but have been unable to do for most of their life because they're just trying to get by. And now the kid is so distant and off in their own world that they don't even really want much to do with their parents and end up in these horrible, troubling situations. But I'm sure we won't. We're just going to say you're really horrible, and we're going to say a bunch more parents are really horrible.
Yeah.
And, maybe some are. Was she ignorant? Was she stupid? Was she very wrong in what they did and ignoring their son? Yeah, there probably should have been more that was done. But are we really addressing the problem here by punishing Jennifer Crumbley and eventually her husband? I think that's a big question. Here's another piece of her testimony talking about how she thought she was close with her son.
In terms of your relationship with your son, how did you think your relationship was?
I thought we were pretty close. We would talk. We did a lot of things together. I trusted him, and I felt like I had an open door and he can come to me about anything. I mean, I felt as a family the three of us were really close.
Okay, you're getting a lot of, no, it's okay. You're getting a lot of redness here. Is that normal?
Yes, because I'm talking in front of people and my nerves act up. So I get splotchy and I might break out in hives, and I apologize.
Okay, but you are okay.
Yeah, I'm fine.
And I think it's easy for us on this side of the mic and such to recognize mental illness. It's something we deal with every single day. Not everybody does, thankfully. And it's easy to point and say, oh my gosh, you should be able to recognize these sort of things. But a lot of people can't. That goes back to education. That goes back to this being an easier topic for us to handle in our society, which I'm sorry, it just isn't. And I wish it was, but it is not. And it continues to be villainized. So I think there should be some grace here if mom doesn't actually realize right away how bad things are. Again, we go back to the notebook and the math paper and all that. That's a little different. Right. That's a glaring red sign. But if she didn't notice it before then, I she's not me, I'm not her, and she's not everybody else, and everybody else is not her.
It just seems like they've been coping and just trying to scrape along a living, whether it's emotionally, financially, physically, all of it. They're just barely freaking getting by, if at all.
Yeah.
And he slipped through the cracks. And like you said, we're not trying to make excuses. She should have been more vigilant, but maybe she was doing the very best that she could in a really shitty situation.
And maybe that's another thing. And that's a term that I hate, is do the best you can.
Right.
Because it's one of those things where, well, what's that person's version of best?
Right.
And maybe we should be pushing people a little bit more to do better rather than just their best. Because this version of best ain't so good. And it can result in horrible things. Let's take a listen to her thoughts on if her son ever needed any sort of mental health care.
Did you ever believe that your son needed mental health treatment, therapy, counseling, anything?
No. There's a couple of times where Ethan had expressed anxiety over taking tests, anxiety about what he was going to do after high school, whether it was college, military. So he expressed those concerns to me, but not to a level where I felt he needed to go see a psychiatrist or a mental health professional right away, no.
Did you ever deny him or say, no, I'm not going to take you to a mental health professional? Did he ever ask you?
No, I mean, one time when he was talking about what he wanted to do for his future, we did, my husband did call his school counselor to try to talk to him.
Was that a mental health issue?
No, it was more or less addressing what was upsetting my son at that time.
And what was upsetting him?
The fact that he didn't know what he wanted to do.
So if that's true, if that's, all that they were seeing in their home, which may have been, it doesn't sound like he was necessarily running around screaming, I'm going to go shoot up the school directly to them. But there were certainly signs. And then again, we have to take a look if now that she's guilty, parenting, how in depth does a parent need to go to make sure their kid's not going to go shoot up the school? What sort of privacy does that child have? What rights do they have? I mean, it's one thing when they're younger, but when you get to 15, 16, 17, 18, if you've never had a kid in your house that age, then you don't know what the hell you're talking about.
Exactly.
You just don't, because it's a different world. They change dramatically in terms of their mindset, and they're not always in the same planet as the rest of us. But they think that they have the rights of everyone else, but they're too young really to be there. And you have to somehow afford them rights as they grow and privacy as they grow. That's part of being a parent and part of balancing them into life. But it's a balancing act, because do you go read their diary? And if you don't think that there's any problems, why would you? That's we wouldn't want our parents to read our diaries when we were that age.
No.
Especially if we had nothing to hide. If you think there's something to hide, I think, yeah, you got to, step it up. But again, if you don't think that there is a problem, whether you're ignorant to it or not, that's not something I think a lot of healthy parents do.
Well, and don't forget, too, that a lot of these tools, when we say diary or journal, in our day, they were tangible.
Yeah.
Now they're digital. So they're under lock and key. You may not even know it exists. It's one thing if you kept it under your bed and your brother got to it. Yeah. It's different now that it's on your phone. So they may not have even known that anything existed like that.
Here's another piece of the trial where they're talking about his journal entries.
Yes, shooter writes, my parents won't listen to me about help or therapist.
Sir, in that journal, were there entries about the shooter's desire to obtain a 9mm handgun?
Yes.
This is also Exhibit 4.
Yes, the shooter writes, I want to shoot up the fucking school so badly. Soon, I'm going to buy a 9mm pistol.
Sir, were there any passages regarding the shooter's plan for the actual shooting?
Yes, there were. Yes. Shooter writes, I'm about to shoot up the school and spend the rest of my life in prison.
Were there any journal entries about the shooter's access to the 9mm handgun?
There were. The shooter writes, first off, I got my gun. It's a SP 2022 Sig Sauer 9mm. Second, the shooting is tomorrow. I have access to the gun and the ammo. I am fully committed to this now. So I'm going to prison for life, and many people have about 1 day left to live.
Yeah, I mean, that is about as disturbing as it gets.
Yeah.
And unless you're reading your kid's diary, I mean, again, the kid obviously was troubled. But to what extent were they truly aware of it other than, I mean, the notebook entry, which I should also note, the school themselves said, he's better off here with his peers. It's okay.
Which is weird.
They're insanely culpable in this whole thing as well. And if you're the parent and maybe you're not the best at parenting, which is a lot of parents.
Yep.
And the people that you're relying on to give you advice on your child, and if they're good at it, they should be coming to school, if they should not be. And just because the person has the title of counselor, but they have zero experience in any of that field, which is the case in this case, you're not necessarily going and checking credentials either. You're relying on, if the school is telling you this and they're saying, yeah, it's okay, you can come here, you're probably going to go with that. Especially if you're working multiple jobs and you have no other option and you're afraid he's going to kill himself at home. And the school's saying, it's okay, we got this. Obviously you don't.
100%. And especially if you don't have the resources. And I just, man, they're in such a shitty situation. Even if they wanted to get him help, they didn't have the resources. Yeah. So what would they have done?
Well, I mean, the kid, there should have at least been an attempt into counseling and some sort of mental health help. But again, I don't know them very well at all other than what we've seen. But again, it's a matter, do you have the resources? Because guess what? If you don't have insurance, want to pay a couple of $100 for that hour. And oh, by the way, if you wanted to do anything for you, you're going to have to go every single week and maybe multiple times for a kid that's like this. Oh, you're working DoorDash with no benefits.
Yeah, that's going to get you a lot of money.
That'll help.
I've seen so many posts on Reddit about DoorDash and people complaining about the outrageous drives that they've been put on to earn $4.
Yeah.
There is no way DoorDash, and we're not bashing DoorDash, but there's no way that extra job would have provided them the means to get him the help that he needed.
No, there really isn't. Here's more of her testimony in court.
Now, the one thing that seemed consistent with your son, to you at least, is his desire to obtain a weapon. Is that right?
I wouldn't say that, no.
He had a consistent desire to obtain a weapon.
Not to me, he did not.
Okay. You didn't know about the 9mm?
Oh, I knew about it.
Okay. You didn't know about the 22s?
I knew about them.
And in fact, you posted on Instagram that he got himself a 22.
Correct.
In June of 2021.
Correct.
And from that time up until the November 26, 21 purchase, he was wanting to get a 9mm.
I know him and my husband had discussed getting a 9mm. I'm not part of those conversations.
But you knew about it.
I knew, but not that he was so, however you described it.
Sorry, Jennifer, you can only bury your head in the sand so long before it comes to bite you in the ass.
And it did bite her in the ass, clearly.
And I
here.
think that's exactly what and why she was found guilty and why she should have been found guilty. Because that right there was a prime example of, I didn't know about it, but you knew they were talking and he's disturbed. Like, you did. You didn't want to admit it. You didn't want to come to the realization or the acceptance that your son is really fucked in the head and needs help because you didn't think anything like this would actually go down. And then it did. And now you're like, oh shit, I didn't know. Here's a little bit more of her testimony before we wrap up this segment and take a listen to her defense counsel's closing arguments, which you'll want to stick around for that circus. Here's this.
It was surprised to me that they went to the gun store that day. Okay. It was not surprising to me that they purchased a gun that day.
And it didn't upset you that it bought a gun?
No, it did not.
It upset you that it cut into your Christmas tree shopping time, but it didn't upset you that it bought a gun?
Correct.
Okay. And you told us that it was, in your words, James's responsibility to take care of that gun?
Correct.
Okay. Now, you don't deny that, at least according to the cell phone evidence, the photographic and video evidence, you're the last adult to have possession of that gun?
Correct.
Okay. You were with him at the range on November the 27th?
Correct.
You saw your son shoot the weapon?
Correct.
You saw him shoot the last practice round before the shooting on November 30th?
At the range?
Yeah.
Yes, correct.
You saw how he stood?
Honestly, that didn't mean anything to me at that time until this whole case came about, and I've learned what a shooter's stance is. So
he knew how to use the gun?
Yes, he did.
Okay.
He's used one before.
At the end of the day, you have ignorant people, a culture of ignorance, a culture around celebrating the love of these guns that they didn't need for any reason whatsoever. And a culture that doesn't really put a whole lot of weight on mental health or how important it is or what the repercussions can be if it's lacking to an extreme. And that's what we ended up here in this case. At the end of the day, that's exactly what it is. We got more on this. Be sure to press subscribe wherever you're watching or listening so you can dive into that as we continue to discuss the case and the guilty verdicts against Jennifer Crumbley.
Sick of the ads?
We are too.
Start listening with no commercials now and get access to all of our episodes in advance of everyone else.
Become a True Crime Today Premium Plus subscriber on Apple Podcasts.
Search True Crime Today Premium Plus on Apple Podcasts or go to our podcast page and sign up now.
True Crime Today Premium Plus.
Sign up now.